Well, just over 40 days into his 5-year term, President William Ruto's government is taking shape, with a cabinet of 22 cabinet secretaries getting sworn into office earlier today. Now, it was not an easy ride for some of the cabinet appointees, as the vetting exercise exposed soft underbellies in some and punched holes in the integrity of others. But they all prevailed at the end of the day to begin their ministerial assignments, with the boss warning that there is no room for failure. But warning shots are turning to ceaseless fire and massive explosions at the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, DCI, along Kiambu Road. Heads have been rolling there, some of them being stopped by the cold wooden panels of the courtroom docks of the accused. A new sheriff has taken charge, and the Special Services Unit is disbanded and its members on the run. Another man on the run was way less lucky. Pakistani journalist Arshad Sharif should have been safe in the remote, innocent Magadi scrubland in Kajiado. But someone took his life. Tonight we ask who and why. In Meru, Governor Kawira Mwangaza could well be hanging by the strings of a guitar, as an early impeachment vote looms large, as her fight with members of the County Assembly tunes for the worst. On Jamila's memo, a climate change warning shot from Copenhagen, Denmark. Gashuri's punchline is live from the national vetting massage parlor. Kai Kai's kicker reflects on delocalization of teachers. And on my take, the drought cycle is here. But when will we ever learn? The news gang gets down to work.
You have been appointed, and you have sworn that you have been appointed to the Cabinet of Kenya. I know there are regional persuasions. There are community persuasions. I haven't appointed any cabinet for any region, or for any county, or for any community. I have appointed a cabinet of Kenya. I expect you to respect your oath of office and serve all Kenyans equally.
And so it's getting down to work, ladies and gentlemen. That was today. Finally, the government is taking shape in various ways, but at least at the executive level. Well, that was what happened today, but it was a bit of a process getting here, right? Mm-hmm. There was a vetting process. Some say there were some miracles. There were some issues with that. Gashuri, let's start off with you. Let's start at the beginning with the vetting process.
Well, nothing new that happened during the vetting process. It's basically what was expected. It was the third time, actually, we were seeing cabinet secretaries being vetted. Not even talking about once in a while when a cabinet secretary has been nominated in case a vacancy has arisen. But 2013, 2017, and now 2022, the third time. Pretty much what happened in the two previous vetting processes. Only that this time, I found that the appointments committee was a little more structured in how they did it. An improvement of what happened in 2013 and 2017. But what was expected actually happened. The post-election, I would call a little bit of post-election hangover is still around. You would still see the line of questioning was taking the all too familiar route of a bit of Azimio and a bit of Kenya Kwanza, the majority-minority kind of a situation in the House. You could tell some of the cabinet secretaries, I think because of the familiarity with the committee, you would see they were being treated in a nice way, I would say. Their capacity to answer questions was also quite different. Parliamentary CSs who have been in Parliament, Kipchumba Murkomen, Professor Kithure Kindiki, Aden Duale, Alice Wahome, Moses Kuria, you could tell they were in a very familiar territory. They didn't really struggle. And you could see even the parliamentarians were kind to them.
Yeah.
The only person who faced a little bit of difficulties is Linturi and Aisha Jumwa. And it was anticipated that the cases that they were facing in court would come.
All right.
How they answered also kind of acquitted them. And see, I still remember the Aisha Jumwa vetting process. I think she anticipated the line of questioning, and I would think she opted to change course by taking it very personal and giving a personal story that actually carried the day as opposed to the issues that were being raised against her.
Right, and it was towards the end that she actually went into Kiswahili. And remember when we were watching that, I actually thought a masterstroke for her would have been to continue answering all the questions in Kiswahili, because that was, you know, and this is not about English being a language of, you know, test of intelligence or whatever. She just really does express herself better in that language, and perhaps would have had it to her advantage and have the MPs, you know, sort of struggle with asking the questions in Kiswahili, which happened at some point. But like you say, it was familiar territory for some, but Jamila, it was unfamiliar territory for others.
Totally unfamiliar territory for others. And one of them, of course, is the new cabinet, the tourism cabinet secretary, Penina Malonza, who actually was rejected. The report that was, excuse me, that was done by the committee actually approved all the others except her. And remember, there was also a minority report that had issues with 3 of the nominees. That was Midhika Linturi, Aisha Jumwa, and herself. But then now, what we saw in Parliament yesterday was, I think, almost expected by some, if you would put it that way, especially after the report, the summary was given by a Member of Parliament, Kimani Ichung'wah, about why they decided to reject her. And he actually did not give any reason. There were no issues raised about her integrity. There were no issues raised about her qualifications. There were no issues raised about her as a person and her ability to lead, about her as Penina Malonza. Because remember, she had been deputy governor and she had run for women rep. And she lost, though. And I think she was the only one who ran on UDA in that area, and she lost. But then he said there are no issues about it, just that she was unable to articulate issues to do with the tourism docket during the interview. Exactly. And of course, there were these weird reasons that were given in Parliament by some of those members of Parliament, some which actually annoyed some women who spoke out about it. I won't repeat it here. But then now, eventually, it sort of like turned out to be in her favor. I say it that way because remember that minority report I'm mentioning? It actually didn't feature much. In the discussions yesterday, it was almost forgotten. So the issue became Penina Malonza, and why should she not be approved? In fact, now it became an issue of ritual because members of Parliament from the Ukambani area where she comes from were in support of her.
Including her MP,
including
who actually,
exactly, Irene Kasalu, who actually moved a motion.
And actually she was her competitor in the woman rep competition for Kitui County.
For Kitui County. And she lost to Kasalu, but she's the one who brought a motion in Parliament saying, no, we need to vote to retain her. And she was. And she was sworn in today. And whatever happened in Parliament, she is the CS for tourism. And someone was saying maybe because of the circumstances under which she was nominated, rejected, and then approved, she may end up being one of the best CSs we have ever seen. Because I think she has an extra point to prove as compared to all the others. But all that said and done, she is the CS for tourism. And something else maybe before Linus comes in that I think came up during the whole process is the wealth issue, where each one of them was being asked to declare their wealth. At the end of it all, they're worth about 15.25 billion. And of course, there are all these comparisons to 15.25 billion means how much more wealth they have than the president of the US and his whole cabinet and all that. And with the richest being the chief Prime Secretary Musalia Mudavadi with 4 billion, and the one with the less billion being the CS for lands with 80 million. But hey, for me, that was one of the interesting things about this whole process of trying to vet the CS nominees. But it's over, and now they have been sworn in.
And now we have them in. And while we're still on the vetting process, and you talk about, so the wealth declaration, which has become an interesting farce in this country, to be honest. You know, they present whatever they do. These are supposed to be public record, and they're supposed to be done on a yearly basis, and not just for cabinet members. All state officers. And these are things that, you know, are deposited in Parliament, right? And, you know, are supposed to be things that you use as a measure every year to say, you know, what's happening. Might you be using public resources for your own benefit by using your position? But there was that, and then there was also, you know, the other issue of, you know, like Jamila, you said the report that came out and rejected Malonza, and then, you know, it was on the floor of the House. They then rejected that rejection and finally adopted. And like you said, you know, it's all history. But what factors were at play, Linus? Was it regional, political, you know, gender? And is the vetting process really something that gives us the best candidates we have, or does it just seem like we're going through the motions with it?
There are two ways of looking at the vetting process. The first way is to celebrate it for what it is. Article 152 of the Constitution requires that the President shall nominate and with the approval of Parliament, appoint cabinet secretaries to office. We must celebrate this departure from the old tradition. Remember, in the old days and under the old Constitution, the nomination and appointment of cabinet ministers was done by the President exclusively. And, you know, they used to do it in a very crude way. It is a 1 p.m. bulletin on the national broadcaster radio, and they will announce, the President will announce that it's been announced from State House that this is the cabinet. And you'll be fired similarly just by radio. And I think drafters of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 should be celebrated for really trying to modernize and to democratize governance by introducing Article 152.2, which then says, Mr. President, you will appoint Mrs. President, you will appoint cabinet, but with the approval of Parliament. Mm-hmm. But this being the third term since the introduction of the new Constitution, it's time for us to reflect and say, is it working? Has it delivered the intended purposes? When the drafters put it there, what did they want to achieve? In my view, what they wanted to also achieve is to improve the quality of governance and make sure that the people who will be in charge of decision-making in the government are people who are fit to do that, and fit in many ways, competence, and also with regard to their standing in terms of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. There's a whole chapter 6 which talks about integrity. Mm-hmm. Vetting really should be about integrity, whether you are fit to hold office. That is the entire purpose of this vetting exercise, which is why the majority of the petitions that were filed, and you know, Parliament received petitions from about 23 to 25 petitions on different nominees. For example, on Aisha Jumwa, there were 5 petitions, all of them opposing her nomination on grounds that, you know, she's facing murder charges and she's also facing corruption and misappropriation of funds charges. There is mythical injury as well. Questions were raised about his integrity. Questions were raised about the integrity of the former governor of CBK.
And Ababu Namamba as well for 2014. He was at the PAC.
And all these questions were around chapter 6. Right. Now, if you look from the time we came up with this new constitution, that is 27th of August 2010, all the way to now, this is the third cabinet that's going through this process. Not once has a cabinet minister or a cabinet nominee been rejected on any grounds, especially through this vetting exercise. My other point on this, really, governments are formed by the winners of the election. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the lesson and the bottom line of this vetting exercise. President William Ruto put out a list of 22 cabinet nominees, and today swore each one of them into office. And I want to come to the Penina Malonza issue. What really transpired? You know, in the opinion of members of Parliament, and I saw Majority Leader Kimani Ichung'wah trying to explain that she has no issues with integrity, no issues with no court cases, nothing. Yeah. Just the grasp of the issues of the office at hand. But you see, we are in Bible chanting times in terms of the governing environment. And it reminds me of the biblical story of the lady in the Bible who Jesus met, I think, by the well. And he said, who will cast the first stone? And remember, he was drawing the floor, and when he raised his head, everybody had left. Because really, if chapter 6 is not an issue on quite a number of the candidates in the list of 22, why should Penina Malonza be rejected for purportedly not understanding the job? And of course, even the vetting committee itself, in who was the expert in the matters of running Ministry of Tourism and National Heritage. You know, we are being subjective here because even they were not vetted to vet this team. So it was a question of who would cast the first stone. And the answer was, really, Malonza should be let go. But I think also there's one more thing that had to happen. Any rejection of any candidate would have been a slap in the face of President William Ruto and his administration. That, you know, he did a list and 1 or 2 or 3 or any number of candidates were rejected. And that politically is not good, you know, it's not good optics.
It would reflect poorly.
It would reflect badly, especially for a president who has basically, since election, delivered on everything that he wanted to do. He wanted Wetangula to be Speaker of the National Assembly. He became Speaker of National Assembly. Kingi to be Senate Speaker. He became Senate Speaker. And now he had a list of 22, and he got the 22. I don't think he was going to let that pass. But here is to the president and his team. There's this whole debate of innocent until proven guilty. That principle is taking Kenya places. And I don't mean this in a positive sense, because you can possibly be involved in an incident where somebody is dead, but you can serve in cabinet pending determination. Can that be extended to even the chicken thief? Is that possible? To the church committees that you can sit, but you know, we have not proved that you have stolen. You will sort that out, continue sitting in the parish council until we determine. You know, we are, you know, ethics really is not a law issue. It's about morals. And I think the president, by having quite a number of people with questions over their integrity in the list, this is a contempt card to section, or rather chapter 6 of the Constitution on leadership and integrity.
Yvonne, look at it this way. This is the president's list of the persons, men and women, he would want to work with to deliver on his promises. He brings the list to Parliament, a Parliament that has a majority of the members from his party or his coalition. So much as the minority team would have raised issues ordinarily, would have raised issues of integrity, like Lina says, it was almost inconceivable that any of those nominees would be rejected. Even when that discussion probably was lost at the committee level, the plenary had the final say. And remember, the procedure is simple. The Appointments Committee brings a report. If they agree, they bring one report. If they disagree in one way or another, they bring a majority report and a minority report. But the plenary has the say in terms of either adopting the report in totality, rejecting it in totality, or amending it. So in this particular case, the plenary opted to reject the minority report in totality, and then was left with the report, that the majority report that had recommended the rejection of one, that is Penina Malonza. Here's the situation, and I agree in totality with what Lina says. If Malonza would have been rejected by Parliament, then it would have meant that the president had picked a nominee who was not qualified or competent to handle a ministry. So it would have been a dent on him. Then on the other hand, there's a discussion about letting the institutions work. Let Parliament work, let the judiciary work. So it was kind of a dilemma of sorts. But more prominently, this would have what was easier for the executive. It was to have all the nominees approved for appointment as cabinet secretary. Now, this is where the challenge is. In the event that the nominee or the nominees, particularly for Malonza, who was rejected by the committee, if she was to go ahead and not perform, then Parliament would tell the president, we told you.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. But in the event she goes and succeeds, then the president would say, I told you. And the majority team would be, I told you this, so. She was competent, only that on that particular day, she had a bad morning or a bad afternoon, if you may like it. But this is how I look at it. The pressure is particularly on Malonza, is on Aisha, is on Linturi. The three who were the subject of discussion in the plenary on their approval or rejection. They will have to work as hard as possible, actually twice or even thrice as the others, just to prove that you guys wanted to reject us, but here we are.
I think, Yvonne, the next step now is they've been sworn in, and the president said there's no room for failure. You need to start working. Some of them left their swearing-in ceremony and went immediately to take over. The officers. Among them is the new agriculture CS, Mithika Linturi, and he has a lot of work to do with the agriculture sector, with fertilizers, with farming, with the drought, with climate change and its effects on farming, and the food crisis that we are facing. He has a lot on his plate. The price of unga is still high. So he needs to start kazi na msubiri. And then the another ministry that still has a lot of work also is the new ministry that is being taken over by Chelugu, which is Cooperative and Micro, Small and Medium Enterprise Development. What a mouthful. Because of the Hustler Fund. And all that pertains to it. The fact that now there are conditions to it now compared to what was said during the campaigns. It's the key pillar of President Ruto's campaigns, and right now what he has talked about it, of course, is a bit different, as I've said, compared to what people had expected. They thought it was just free money, but then now there are conditions, there's interest, and there's all that. That is now under Minister Chelugu's docket. He has that huge task awaiting him. Ministry of Environment, as I said, issues to do with climate crisis and its effects on the environment, its effect on food and agriculture, its effect on so many things that we're witnessing in our country. When Minister Soipantuya also has a lot on her plate. And I think now we need to look at the next step, which is now getting them PSs to be able to work with these ministers. We have 50 of them. Gashuri did a very comprehensive story yesterday about 250 who have been...
5 per state
department. We had over 9,000 who applied, 580-something who were interviewed, 250 who've made it from the interview. Now we need to, out of 250, to come out with 50. And I think each one needs to be competent enough. When you go into a ministry, the PS is really the person who does all the work. Who runs it, and that's the next step now. Who are these PSs who are going to be?
And I think the other thing is the economy, obviously, and the country's debt situation. And so to see somebody who was at the Central Bank of Kenya now running Treasury, it'll be interesting to see what he does. Inflation is at an all-time high. There's the Ukraine crisis that is causing, global concern. Is there a recession that is looming? The dollar. And all of that, of course, affects the cost of living, which is a huge thing right now. I mean, the cost of electricity, the cost of fuel, the cost of basic foods. And just to go back to the issue of food, food is the biggest driver of inflation in this part of the world, and particularly in Kenya. So it is the price of ugali and unga and others, and that really drives up the inflation in this country. So what solutions he's able to provide, some of the big requirements of collection by KRA. KRA has had, quite a few challenges over the last couple of years, and of course, just coming out of a COVID-19 pandemic, he has his work cut out for him, and he's no stranger to this docket, right? Kai?
No, absolutely, Yvonne. And one of the things that will also be quite interesting to follow for the next 5 years is the style of President Ruto in as far as the management of cabinet and ministries is concerned, because both President Ruto and his deputy Rigathi Gachagua really invoke the style of Mwai Kibaki. And what Mwai Kibaki did was to let the ministers perform. They let them to work, basically set them free to do their work. The same approach was taken partially by the first President Jomo Kenyatta, where ministers somehow had a free hand, although there was the impression of seniority. You have senior ministers without. Nobody uses the word senior, but
or prime.
You don't call them prime, but you know very well. Yeah. That Mbiu Koinange, Charles Njonjo, Gigi Kariuki would be quite senior to in the pecking order. It will take some time for us to start seeing that, because that will also emerge. Because cabinet is also political business. Yeah. It's also about what kind of weight do you pull in the ministry. And there've always been these arguments about key dockets and non-key dockets. All that may not necessarily be accurate. It may be accurate in terms of the budget, in terms of the amount of money allocated to that ministry. But really, the minister, the cabinet secretary,
it's also in their persona
yes. Yeah. You give the ministry the profile and the personality. And it's going to be interesting to see how each of these appointees then weigh in the offices. For example, the health cabinet secretary. Mutai Kagwe finishes as the mtu wa corona. He had the presence in the ministry, and now we have Nakumisha, who is very new, first-time appointment to such a senior position. It'll be very interesting to see how she fits into the Ministry of Health, a very, very busy ministry. And one that has to get to work immediately also, considering that Ebola is just next door in Uganda, and also considering the fact that COVID really never left. It's somewhere around the
universal healthcare and the questions around NHIF and funding that and providing affordable healthcare to all Kenyans as per Article 43 of the Constitution. But I think, even ministries that are perhaps seen as, like you say, not as prominent, like sports. It's an equally important ministry. What will Ababu Namwamba do with it? What sort of persona will he bring? What sort of solutions will he bring to that? And there's opportunities, I think, for all of them to bring, something of themselves and to bring some certain importance and prominence and priority to it. And I think that can only be done by, the cabinet secretaries themselves, regardless of the allocation.
Actually, I heard the president today say, don't be narrow in your view of your responsibilities as cabinet secretaries. Actually, the swearing-in ceremony, they did not specifically swear by a certain docket. It was the office of cabinet secretary, and telling them that they should as well be responsible for whatever is happening in the neighboring ministry or in the next ministry.
So and it's all interlinked.
It's collective
Treasury
responsibility.
With health and
they're very interlinked.
With,
And as for example, you talk about sports. I was having a chat with Michael Kinyi. Remember, Kenya is still banned?
Yeah.
So that's an immediate assignment.
Yes.
Look, for example, even for labor, we still have stories that we are doing every day about Saudi.
Yeah.
We have education, the CS for education,
CBC, transition.
CBC is a serious issue, Hi, talk about national security, Professor Kindiki. We still have cases of insecurity up north and even in some parts of North Rift.
Samburu, all of those areas.
So all of them come in with immediate tasks that are waiting for them. And what would be important to look at is how they are able to perform, number one. Because I foresee a situation where non-performance may be very difficult to deal with. And actually the warning shot was fired immediately.
Right,
so I don't know whether that's pressure or that's...
Yeah, I said you'll have to deal with me, if you fail. Just very quickly before, because I know we have a break and... Do you want to say something?
Yes, just 10 seconds.
Go ahead.
Other than Cabinet Secretary Chelugui, all the others are new. Like they're all coming in clean slate.
Right.
There are no, hakuna kitu hapo hivyo, umekuja karatasi mpya. So how you perform going forward now depends on you. Because there's no hang-ups, there's nothing hanging over your shoulders, there is maybe no scandal attached to you with that ministry you're coming into. This is new. And I think it's an opportunity for each and every one of them to actually perform. And of course, you keep talking about what the president said today. you will be your brother's keeper or your sister's keeper, because usiangalie tu wizara yako peke yako, naona mwenzio anaumia and you're like, yeah, wacha umie ni yake peke yake. You need to make sure that you're all winning, and if you're doing well, you're all doing well together. And I think that stood out for me. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
There's just something else we should expect, and that is a change of style in terms of how the cabinet will conduct itself. And I picked this entirely from the kind of messaging the president had today, and even before that. When, for example, he says, you will go to Parliament and respond to questions on the floor of the House, he expects a more frontal cabinet that will lead from the front. We must remember that in the last 10 years, the Uhuru Kenyatta cabinet was not majorly frontal. A lot of them prefer to be in the background. They will not be in media interviews. They will not be in Parliament. They will not be anywhere. You will just know there is a cabinet secretary, but you will not see their faces. I think from what I could gather from the speech today and earlier messaging, President Ruto expects a more frontal cabinet that will be out there, hands-on. You are a minister, more almost in the mold of the old, where cabinet ministers were the physical and visible leaders of their ministries, not the semi-spiritual that we got in the last 10 years. Some of them that are completely away from the public eye. So I think what we will see is a more frontal cabinet. You'll see them in the field, maybe in conferences, even in meetings and all that. And just a final point on what we should also expect. Cabinet, like I said, is political business. Yeah. And this cabinet will also work with eyes on 2027.
Yeah.
Put it this way.
We're really
just a small one. Talking about politics, it's a cabinet for now and a cabinet for 2027. Look at even the regional aspects of this cabinet. Even in areas where the president didn't get as many votes as probably one would have maybe assumed, look, Ukambani, 3 cabinet slots. 2, okay, let's say 2 plus an advisor. That's significant, bearing in mind that he didn't get as many votes from that region. From Coast, talking about a speaker, Aisha, talking about Salim Vuria. So you're also looking at a cabinet that has an angle at 2027. And more fundamentally, and Lina says a more frontal cabinet. Look at this cabinet. It is also politicians heavy. That should tell you something. Yeah, absolutely. And let's take a break now. When we come back, something's happening at DCI and something terrible happened in this country earlier this week, and that put Kenya on the map, global map, and not in a good way. We'll be talking about that much more when we return. This is Newsgang. The hashtag is Newsgang at Citizen TV Kenya. We'll be back in a few.